Okay, Eric's working tonight, so I'm covering for him. We are going to look at Genesis chapter 5. I'm not as ambitious as him. I don't think we could get into 6, even though I would absolutely love to. There's some good stuff in 5, believe it or not, even with the genealogies, so we'll try to give those at least some time here. Before we get started, let's have a word of prayer. Our loving and gracious Lord, we're so grateful to you for the blessings of these last few days and the weather that has been so much more mild and pleasant. We thank you that it has not been hazardous for folks as they've been traveling to and fro for the holiday season. And we're so grateful that that's not had to been a concern for us this year. We thank you that we can spend time with our families and share in memories and building more memories and wonderful food and time together, playing games. It's so wonderful to be able to be together with the people who we love and who love us. And that, Lord, is what motivates us to be here now, because we are seeking to be with the one who loves us the most, the one who has loved us despite the fact that we have rebelled, that we have defied you, that we have opened our mouths and our hearts in activities that are sinful and they're deserving of death. And yet you, Lord, continue to reach down with loving kindness and tenderness as a father reaches down, as a husband reaches down, as a brother reaches down. All these different analogies and metaphors that teach us about your strong, abiding desire to be reconciled with us and that we can come back to you and be clean and be holy. And we ask that you'll help us to understand this, that this hope will grow within us, that our lives here are all about a relationship with you, that what we do and how we think and who we are becoming is all about drawing nearer to the one that we love, being more like him, because we want to be with you, we want to be with those who love you and are like you. And this world is not that place where we will find those things. But we find it, Lord, in your household. We find it among your people. And we ask, Lord, that you will bless us now as we enter into this time of study. These initial events in the history of our race, to recognize the role that love has played, that sin has played, and that human beings in their failed and faulty reasoning and understanding have created a mess that only the sovereign God could fix. And you loved us enough to do that very thing. And so help us, Lord, to appreciate these things. And as we mine your word, help us to pull out the rubies and gems and diamonds that will enhance our lives and our work here, and will build that hope in us, because we know if that hope is firmly anchored, we can withstand anything the devil throws at us. We love you so much. We can't wait to be with you, see you face to face. Please, Lord Jesus, come quickly. It's through our Lord that we pray. Amen. Okay, so as we left off with chapter 4, kind of resetting the narrative from Cain's slaughtering of Abel, and how the Bible puts a particularly large emphasis on the fact that this righteous man, Abel, his bloodline's been chopped off, and because of Cain. And so then it jumps into the next son, another son that Adam and Eve have, that Eve gives birth to Seth. And she specifically cites the fact that, what is the fact that she cites about Seth? What is he to her? And well, to her and to Adam ultimately, but what does his name mean, and what is it that he represents to them as a family? Seth, what is he?
He's the son that replaced the one that they lost, Abel.
Okay. And that's an interesting way to see that, isn't it? To see that he's the one that I've acquired this one from the Lord because of what Cain did. And, you know, I don't know. I have, praise be to God, I've never lost a child. But you don't typically think when people, if they lose a child and then they have another one, that they would see, well, this is my replacement, because we recognize, well, each individual is unique And I certainly don't think that that's what Eve was just foolishly saying, oh yeah, Seth is just now, he's Abel 2.0, and Abel, it's like I never lost him. That's not what she's saying. But I do think that it's interesting that she sees Seth as somehow important to standing in the role that Abel had. And when you if we're going to compare Cain and Abel first, how do they compare to one another? Those two brothers, before Abel died, how did they compare to one another? What was Abel in his activities, in his behavior? How does the Bible depict him, not just here, but throughout even New Testament scriptures? How was Abel?
Well, he loved the Lord so much, and then, he was pleased with the Lord, and he did what the Lord wanted.
Yeah.
Cain was the same way, but something happened that the devil got a hold of him, so he changed his ways, and that's where he became evil. Okay.
Yeah, very much so. The Abel was righteous, and Cain, though he wasn't born wicked, and how some people want to throw that on, see, here's the original sin. That's not at all what the text is saying. Cain ends up choosing poorly, okay? He chooses unrighteous. And so Abel is righteous, Cain is unrighteous, and the righteous one was slaughtered. And so Seth is being portrayed not only by his mother, but I think as the Bible goes along, kind of tracing his genealogy, that Seth is going to pick up that righteous mantle. Now, I'll be honest, when my wife and I chose the names of each of our children, we chose both their first name and their middle name very carefully. Each one of their middle names has the name Yahweh in it somewhere. But the first name was very much something that was to reflect how we felt. Abigail means the joy of my father, or my father's joy. Of course, this is my first child. And I thought, yeah, this is wonderful. That's a perfect example of what that means. David's name means beloved, and so on and so forth. As you go along, Daniel, God is my judge. And so these different names, that they carried with it for us meanings. And my son, David, his middle name's Joel, that is Yahweh is God. And I wanted him to have that sort of attitude. I wanted him to embody that. And I can't, my brain is scrambling to try to remember all the different middle names. I used to have them. I had to start in order. If I started with Abby and went down, I could have gotten it, but I failed now. But each of their middle names, it expresses something that we wanted as their parents. And I'm not saying that to toot our own horn. It's just that was the desire we had. And parents, a lot of times parents have that. Now, a lot of times people just make up names, and don't get me started on some of the names people come up with. But names having meaning and value, that is a biblical concept. That's an ancient concept. And so I think that part of what Eve is doing here is she's not saying that, Abel, or that Seth is going to replace Abel, and it's like I never lost him. Oh, no. That mama's going to feel that loss for the rest of her life, as any parent would. But her hope in that Seth can follow in the footsteps of the son that was righteous, that was good. Because Cain apparently is not going to follow that path. We don't have any sort of redemptive arc for Cain. I'm not saying that he couldn't have at some point, but certainly as a mama, she saw Seth as being like Abel. That was her hope. And so the lineage of Seth is going to very much be that for her, and that would seem to be the arc that his lineage actually follows, that Seth and his family were righteous, like Abel's hopefully would have been. But it's important to recognize some of those little details there at the end of chapter 4, that this is something this is a hope that parents can have, that parents do have, that this child will be good, this child will be righteous. I hope that he can be like what his older brother was. That unrighteousness snuffed him out, but that he will choose a path of righteousness. She wants him to be like the righteous brother, not the unrighteous brother. And one of the things that really dawns on me as this chapter 5 tells us how long all these dudes lived, recognizing that you would have great grandfathers, that your children would be sitting on their knees listening to these stories, hearing about these things, And that there would be, so you would have adult children that would be mentoring children of, multiple generations down the road. And that's just not something that we can fathom. If it goes past a great-grandparent being in your life, that's a pretty impressive thing. Certainly great-great-grandparents just don't hang around. We just don't see that. It's infinitesimally small, the amount of people that have actually been old enough to remember a great-great-grandparent, if at all. And so we recognize that those influences will be there because the influence of older siblings who are adults, not only upon a new generation of children, but upon another generation, and you would be having children for hundreds of years. And I can't even fathom that, but the power of a positive influence, though, godly adult children influencing godly young children, and just how important that would have been. And just something I just kind of wanted to point out, that here's a mama's hope, and I would assume a father's hope as well, that this reaching forward, that what was taken from Abel's death, that Seth is he's carrying that hope. And I think a lot of us have had that, right? A lot of us have had situations where we hope that a next generation can be either do it as well or do it better than the children that have come before. And that's the hope of every parent, at least it ought to be. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out before we really moved along in this. Randy?
I think you said it there, talking about hope, and just considering the tragedy that this one family experiences, where she really lost two sons,
mm-hmm.
the righteous Abel, and then the other one that leaves and is kind of lives as an outcast. I mean, the hope that she had in Cain was, her firstborn was dashed,
mm-hmm.
displaced, perhaps, and now her hope is restored in this son.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she had many other sons and daughters as well, but this is the one that we're being told about.
Yeah.
Because of the ramification that's for Israel. But I had something down here in my Bible, I don't know where I wrote this down, that the name Seth has the allusion to being anointed. I don't know if that's true or not. Given.
Yeah, given, acquired. It kind of has a couple different.
Be set into place is another way of.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely something that she is identifying as purposeful. Like this is something God has done, and it is meaningful, it is impactful. In our world where millions of children are born every day, it's easy to throw that off, but that's millions of special imagers, millions of Yahweh's imagers coming into this world. The birth of a human child is never, ever a ho-hum small thing. Now, our culture can treat it that way. Certainly our politicians do, don't they? But it is not a small thing. It's not a small thing when an imager of Yahweh is born and when an imager of Yahweh dies. It's not a small thing. And because it's commonplace for us, does not make it commonplace for the Creator. And so I think that finding this emphasis and being able to recognize that every human being is appointed by Yahweh to represent Him. And the intention is to represent perfectly. We don't do that, but that's the intent, right? When God made man, the intent was for him not to be filled with sin or rebellion, but for him to be filled with righteousness and to do it perfectly. That's God's intent. Now, God knew that wasn't going to happen, but that doesn't change the fact that that's the intent. And so it's easy to kind of lose sight of the fact that every human being is appointed, is a gift, is all these different things, whether their parents recognize it or not. That is Yahweh's purpose. And it's nice when parents are able to kind of sum that up with this is a special gift. I think the name is Zechariah. Is it Zechariah that means Yahweh remembers? I think it's either Zechariah. I don't think it's Jeremiah. I think it's Zechariah. But it's just names that carry with them. You can look at the prophet Zechariah and see all the things he was given in the time of the return from captivity, and that they were not going to be forgotten in God's restoring them and bringing them back through Joshua and Zerubbabel. So his name as a prophet was very meaningful. The Bible is filled with things like that. But just to see that Seth was there was hope for him, for his parents, as there should be for all parents. I think the difference is that we're going to see that hope in Seth's lineage is actually fulfilled. The Sethites end up being a good family, good people for a long period of generations, which of course is going to connect to God's people down the road. So, anything else before we actually get into chapter 5? Okay. Let's look at chapter 5, verse 1. This is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and he blessed them, and he called them mankind in the day that they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. And after he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Okay, so I've already kind of labored a little bit on the likeness part, but I don't want us to miss this. Once again, for like the fourth or fifth time at least, Moses, who's the one writing these things down at the behest of Yahweh on Mount Sinai, is emphasizing man and children and that likeness that they carry. So let's follow this for just a minute. Adam is made in whose image?
God's image.
Okay, he's made in Yahweh's image. Then Adam has a child. And what does the text tell us about that child?
He was made in Adam's image.
Okay, so this is an imager that follows both the pattern of being made in Yahweh's image and also being made in his daddy's image, his earthly father. And Moses is emphasizing that, and I don't pretend to grasp all of the levels at this stage as to what Moses is getting at, but I certainly think that there's a powerful importance that we don't want to miss. We don't want to forget how blessed we are as God's people, as Yahweh's imagers, that we can make our own little imagers. That is something that no other created imager of Yahweh, not the angels, not the cherubs and seraphs and whatever other, archangels. There's a lot of questions as to where the overlap is. I don't know. And if I care when I see God, great. If not, okay. But we know that there's a supernatural family out there that are also said to be imagers of Yahweh, sons of God, things like that. And they're not allowed to procreate. It's not given to them to do that. But it's given to us. Man is blessed with the privilege of producing his own little imagers. Now, they're ultimately imagers of Yahweh. But we get to see it in ways that I have to take on faith that I image my Heavenly Father, because I can't see him. I can see that in my children. Nicole tells the story that when Jason came out, and because he came out so quickly, he didn't get all smushed up in the birth canal. When he came out, the first thing his mama said was, "Boy, that is a great papa face." My Bill Boswell. When he came out, he looked like a slightly prunish, darker-haired version of my grandfather. Great papa, we call them. And she's exactly right. He came out, I thought the same thing. That's his nose right there. And so seeing that, okay, that's my grandfather, so it wasn't exactly me, but as Jason has grown along, there's lots of pictures of me when I was his age and him, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's his daddy. It is such a privilege to be able to see ourselves in our children. Sometimes, much to my chagrin, I see my behavior and my bad habits pop up in my children. And I lament that, and I regret that, and it's like, why can't you take the good stuff? But of course, they do take good stuff. But recognizing that this is something that is a tremendous gift, and so many people don't care. They don't care to train them, to raise them, to honor God by that. A lot of people don't even care to let them live. They just snuff them out and murder them. But we, as God's people, we know better. We know and believe what Moses says here is that Adam had a family, that Adam had a son that bore his likeness, and his name was Seth. And to connect that idea to that imaging us, it's important to the Scriptures that we get that we are Yahweh's imagers and that our children share in that connection as well. Because it is a gift, but it's also a massive responsibility. If we are allowed to propagate and to make imagers that carry our image and Yahweh's image, then we best better make sure that we're showing them what that looks like, what that behavior ought to be. The status is never going to change. People will always be imagers of Yahweh, even in their rebellion. That doesn't change the fact that they are God's created children. But we can change whether or not we do it well. And as parents, to give birth to help be a part of creating little imagers that belong to Yahweh, that there should be some ownership that we feel as well. Some ownership that should connect with the fact that I am not only raising an imager of Yahweh, but they look like me too. They carry some of my traits. And so I should have investment in that. I should feel some ownership in that. And anybody who's been a parent, I think you feel that. Certainly the good people in this audience have felt that. Seeing something that you recognize of yourself and of your spouse, or maybe one of your parents, you see it, it makes you laugh, it makes you smile, it fills your heart with joy. That's supposed to make us even more dedicated to making sure that we honor the one who gave this gift, that these little ones know their Creator, their true Father. And that's not something to be missed, because Moses is helping to connect the dots to the fact that Israel is said to be Yahweh's firstborn son, kind of thing. That he is my child, that he's just led them out of Israel by the hand, or out of Egypt by the hand, and so forth. So connecting that this is a powerful blessing, and the responsibility they have to not only honor him, but to also make sure that their children honor him and learn who they are, and that process continues to go along. And so it's extremely important that they get that and that they understand that. Okay, so Adam lives for 930 years and he dies. And of course, one of the things I always find funny is at the end of verse 4 that he had sons and daughters. So for about 800 years after Seth, they continue to have sons and daughters. That's a lot of children. It's a lot of children. Of course, those children are having children. Now, let me ask the question that a lot of times our maybe unbelieving friends or skeptics ask, that isn't always a lot of fun to deal with, but who's marrying whom amongst all these families that are being had? If everybody starts from Adam and Eve, and I do believe I don't think there's a second creation somewhere. I don't believe there's any biblical evidence for that at all. So if everybody starts from Adam and Eve, who's marrying whom? Who are Adam's sons marrying? Sisters, Adam's daughters. Sons and daughters, siblings, married each other in the beginning, and we, that's uncomfortable to us, and there's a good reason for that now. But just understand something for just a moment. God's prohibition on the marrying of siblings doesn't show up until, this very place, actually, Mount Sinai. When the law is given, that prohibition against you don't marry your siblings, and the laws, how far out you could go before you could marry someone who was, a second cousin or whatever. But before that was not a prohibition. And I will just put this in merely a scientific perspective. I'm not commenting on all of God's feelings at that point in time. But we understand now that siblings, marrying and reproducing is an awful thing from a genetic standpoint. We understand that there's tons of problems. We are far enough down the road now from the beginning of humankind where there are all sorts of horrible things that come from what we call inbreeding. But at the beginning of time, especially before sin has been ravaging things for thousands of years, those genetic problems weren't there. And we need to get comfortable explaining that to people, because I know it makes it twitchy. I get it, okay? Even though I don't have any biological siblings, it still makes me twitchy, because we all understand, both from a legal standpoint and from a moral standpoint and from a genetic standpoint, how nasty that is now. But there was a time when those problems weren't there, the genetic problems that would cause Yahweh to say, don't marry your siblings, which is how man first begins. There weren't the problems with that from a genetic standpoint, and certainly there weren't moral problems, because it was how God had them reproduce. And we can't run away from this, is something that I want us to understand, because people think they got you. Oh, yeah? Well, who did Cain marry? His sister? Yeah. Wait, what? I thought you guys were against doing stuff like that. Well, we are now, but understand why. So I want you to have at least a little bit of ammunition to say that the marrying of siblings is the only way this worked back then. And the reason it could work is because sin had not propagated enough into man's genetic code and all the problems. We know that the longer we live, the more mutations, the more problems that come about, the more cancers, the more diseases. I mean, we all get it, right? We get new stuff like COVID popping up. It shows that things aren't getting better, things are getting worse from a genetic standpoint. But back at the beginning, when Adam and Eve first started having children, and they did not have any of those genetic problems because sin had just crept in the door, and it was not running amok like it does throughout thousands of years of people having babies. So the reason for God's prohibition is at least I think from a purely scientific standpoint, that human beings have reached a point in the time at Mount Sinai where those genetic problems are going to start to really rear their heads. And we know that from the Egyptians. We know that their inbreeding, which would have been about this same time, was going to start causing some serious problems, why some of those Egyptian pharaohs and queens who were brothers and sisters, why they all looked really funky. Because those problems were starting to really propagate. And so Yahweh gave laws to his people that would protect them from a lot of those genetic problems. Now, we understand that now scientifically. God just told them, this is my law, and this is why I want you to do it, and they were supposed to do it. But when people act like that's just some big hang-up that shows that the Bible can't possibly be true, just help them to remember, well, you know, at the beginning, sin hadn't corrupted everything. Yeah, it was in the world, but man had just started having children. And so there were thousands of years where brothers and sisters could marry, and there would not be any problems genetically. And then Yahweh decided at Mount Sinai that, okay, the time for that is over, and we have since learned that there's good reasons for that. But don't be disarmed or alarmed by that. I want you to know that there's a very logical reason why that was okay back then. He's the creator. He can decide what he wants. And so that's something that you can be empowered with so that you're not caught off guard when people act like they've just got some stinker of a problem for you. And how can there possibly be this, that, and the other? That would mean people had to marry their siblings, and there's just no way. Well, think again, right?
Yeah, when people live in that long, it could have been, it wasn't always their sister, it could have been nieces and uncles and things like that. Within a few hundred years, they'd be old enough to children. So it's not just always those direct brothers and sisters.
Oh, sure. But in the beginning, when they were all Adam's and Eve's sons and daughters, and that's all that there was no propagating. Cain had to marry a sister, and so those things, and we don't have to be afraid of that. It's just the facts. And if people, and that's why I'm approaching this, I try to be careful approaching things scientifically, because this isn't a science class, but understanding that, well, why would God have allowed it then and not allow it now or at Mount Sinai? Well, we know things about why, and it makes perfect sense. If sin has not corrupted things for thousands of years like it has now, or even at the time of the giving of the law, those problems weren't there. And once man had lived long enough and Yahweh told his people to protect them, this is going to be off limits now. No brothers and sisters. Because even Abraham married his half-sister, and there wasn't any problem with that. It was fine. And but 400 and some odd years later, 500 some odd years later, more than that, several hundred years later, it was time to put that aside. And anything else on this? I know that's kind of a weird thing and uncomfortable, but I think it's important to at least deal with that, so it's not an elephant in the room in any discussions you might have. So, cool. Oh, somebody got a hand up over here? Oh, go ahead.
I kind of find it interesting that like the very first relationship that was ever created with that.
Mm-hmm.
So there are automatically
Yeah, exactly. Man really, literally is one blood, isn't he? Because
it makes sense that brothers and sisters at that time.
yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have been weird to them at all because they don't have the baggage that we have, the things that we know, the laws, the morality. You know, it's amazing how hard it can be sometimes to put ourselves in the shoes of people from, thousands of years ago. Well, we're all people, we're all the same. Well, yes and no, because there's things that we think and believe and understand that they didn't know or didn't have to know and can affect things. But yeah, the precedent is there. God took woman. God's creation wasn't finished. Harvey made that point really well a couple of weeks ago. God's creation really wasn't finished till Eve came along. And where did she come from? Adam. She was the other piece of him. And so I think you make a good point that brothers and sisters marrying would have probably seemed like, well, who else would we marry? And so it's and again, without sin, there wouldn't have ever been a reason to put the damper on that, would there, from a reproductive standpoint? Not to creep all brothers and sisters out in here right now, but we went right. Sin messes up everything, and it really does, and that's part of the purpose of what we're looking at here. Okay, so let's look at verse 6. It says, Seth lived 105 years, and he begot Enosh. And after he begot Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Enosh lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And after he begot Canaan, Enosh lived 815 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. And Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalalel. And after he begot Mahalalel, Canaan lived 840 years and had sons and daughters. I just kind of want to throw this out there real quick. Do you notice anything interesting about the age of the men when they start having children?
The age starts dropping, the years drop off a little bit more.
Okay, eventually they do, but in this, go ahead.
They're much higher than what we are used to, but I would say that I don't know that these are their firstborns.
Not always.
These are the significant offsprings of each of these men that make their way in a significant way from Seth all the way to Noah. So it's not necessarily their first kid.
No.
It might just be the important one that gets us where we need to go.
Yes.
For the purpose of showing the generation.
Yeah, and that's true. I misspoke that, but several of these guys are going to end up being firstborns. That's typically where the connection be. It could be that the first several children they had were girls or whatever. But you notice that the ages, though, typically are much older. And it fascinates me. I would love to know, to be a fly on the wall, of how long puberty lasted for people who lived nearly 1,000 years. Puberty's hard enough for like 2 or 3 years, right? Where your body's going through all those changes. We'll just round it up to 4 years. Was it like 40 years for ancient man? I don't know. But there's so much that is different about that world, especially pre-flood, okay? The pre-flood world was different, and in the pre-sin world was even more different, I think. But it's just amazing how things that we might take for granted that, when you're in our culture, in our day and age, when you're in your 70s, you're done having kids. The man might still be able to produce what he needs to, but a female of that same age is just done. We see that even of biblical characters, and you got people who are in their 100s having this particular child, and then they spend the next 600 years having more kids. That's just mind-boggling. And I say that as a way to kind of to temper our expectations that there's a lot about that ancient world that is different and foreign. And the things that God wants us to understand, He's connecting, but there's a whole lot within that that's different. And it's important for us to be humble about our approach to that. That's one of the things that gets a lot of scientists in trouble these days, is quite frankly, the very foolish and arrogant idea of uniformitarianism, that things have always been exactly the same way that they are now as they were back, in history. They'll even say millions and billions of years, but the things that we count on as being something that we can look at and say, well, this is how things are, well, that changes. We learn that about the way that light travels. It used to be that they believed that light travels, the speed of light is like 182,000 miles per second. But then that's, of course, unless it hits gravity, and it changes. And then if it hits a supernova, then it changes. And so there are variables to things that we believe are constant, except here, 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 here. And so that always teaches me that we want to be careful how we approach, how things were. Well, in a world where people lived for the better part of 1,000 years, there might be a couple other things that are a bit different about just life in general. And so we don't want to just arrogantly assume things. We want to let the Bible tell us what's what, and recognize that there are some things that we don't always understand, and that God, unless He's taken the time to explain it, are things that are just, okay, well, that's different. And I guess I got to realize that not everything follows the same uniform plan as man sometimes arrogantly boasts, unless, of course, God says otherwise, like this fruit bears this fruit, and this imager bears this imager. Those things are the same. And that's the reason why God's having this recorded, Randy.
I appreciate your point, Mavericks, about there's a reason why these people are selected, because it's trying to get us to Noah and ultimately to Abraham. And I used to think that, these were all their firstborn sons, so it's the firstborn and the firstborn. And I don't think there's evidence for that. In fact, all you got to do is look at the first couple of verses and see that Seth was not their firstborn. That's right. So we're being given the names of the fathers that led to Noah. And there could have been children that came in front of that. I used to think, well, wow, the ones that waited longer to have kids live longer. I don't necessarily know that you can make that point. I thought that those that he waited, what was it? It was like 187 years, so that's why he lived so long. Or that Noah waited 300 years. I used to think
certainly caused brain damage, that's for sure.
And something that I had considered too, Rick, is that Noah, it says he waited, or that he was 300 when he had Ham, Shem, and Japheth. If that is true, that these aren't just the firstborn children, and we know that Shem is going to be the one through which Noah comes. But Noah might have had children, many children before this, and they were lost in the flood. But these are the three that were faithful. Yeah. And I think that we are getting the faithful line. And that last verse of chapter 4 that says, then men began to call on the name of the Lord. I think there was a reason why Noah was faithful and found grace in the blameless, because his line stayed true to God. And so that's what we're seeing, this faithful line for the most part. We don't know everything that went on in these families, but there was an honoring of God that happened. But I'd never considered the fact that. And maybe there's some other verse that would show otherwise, but it's possible Noah and Mrs. Noah had other children that were lost in the flood.
I think that's entirely reasonable, that they weren't 100% successful with their offspring, I think. Maverick?
I think Randy's point is, you're talking about the faithful generations here as well, is kind of solidified with an Enoch, right? And that, he's one of 3 people in the Bible that is described as walking with God. He's one of 2 that does not die. And so just that significance of these are that from Seth, from Adam all the way to Noah, these are the faithful line that allowed that to happen.
Yes, looking at the various people that come about. There's different importance. There's probably, and I haven't looked at this real closely, there's probably a lot of importance on the different names of these sons that are going to be a part of the table of nations and how those things connect, and who starts to do this, that. We get some of those things, but obviously very relevant to ancient Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai, of these different names. But I think that the righteous connection is the most important one, recognizing that. And Enoch being one of those. Let's go ahead and read about him a little bit. Let's see, jumping down to verse 15. Mahalalel lived 65 years, begot Jared. And after he begot Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. Jared lived 162 years, and he begot Enoch. And after he begot Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Now Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. And after he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That is such a... when you're reading through this list, the genealogies can be a little taxing until you come up to something like this, and it's like, whoa, that kind of comes out of nowhere. Enoch is a man who doesn't end up living very long on the earth before you would expect it to be he had sons and daughters, and then what? He died. But that's not what the text tells us, is it? He had sons and daughters, and he was what? It's a hard way to translate it, but mine says, and he was not. Some of yours might say, and he was not found. I'm told it's kind of a weird word. The point is, he was gone. The point is that it wasn't he had sons and daughters and then he died. It was he had sons and daughters and God took him. He didn't follow that pattern. And there's so much about Enoch that I would love to understand, to ask the Lord, what made that so unique for him? Because as Maverick was saying, you got two people who this happens to, that at least we have recorded in the Bible. Enoch, and then who's the other one? Okay, Elijah. Two men that are both incredible servants of God, men who walked with him. And of course, this idea of walking, what does the Bible mean when it talks about that he walked with God? I mean, it's important for us to kind of chew on this. What does that mean? Maverick?
Only used 3 times. Going back to numbers because I find it interesting. So the frequency of something, right? So it's the two here, and as well as Elijah. So Noah, Elijah.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously it's not a lot of people, right? So we're talking about an exclusive club of people that walk with God in a significant enough way to be called out as one that does that. But I think it's just an extreme level of faith, and devotion that is not possible for most mere men to be able to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you think about what the Lord says in the book of Micah. What does the Lord require you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God, before your God? The idea is that is the path of the righteous. And it comes a point in time where that righteousness really stands out when apparently a lot of folks around you aren't walking that way. But a walk, in the biblical sense, is talking about a lifestyle. Living a certain way. And so for somebody to walk with God means that they were living like God and living in a godly manner in a way that Yahweh wants it to understand as being with Him, that there's an intimacy to that. And of course, that is something that is supposed to be the case, because when man was first made and Adam and Eve were in the garden, what does it say that God was doing there? It talks him as walking. And I don't want us to, and I'm not saying there wasn't some anthropomorphism, but I don't want us to anthropomorphize that to the point where we miss the significance of that. Talking about the voice of Yahweh walking in the cool of the day, which voices don't typically walk. What it's implying is that they heard the one that they were in fellowship with, or they had been in fellowship with. They had a communion with him. That, of course, sin is breaking, and then they lose it and get kicked out. But the text is, and when we go back to Genesis and we read about their sin, the walking, the Yahweh part of walking in the garden is meant to be more than just thinking about a literal presence, although I do believe that for sure, but it's meant to also communicate the fellowship, much like the Sabbath day is meant to be something that we're supposed to think about fellowship. God walking where his people are is a fellowship metaphor, a fellowship idea. So as usual, it's a double entendre. And so Enoch walking with God is also a way of saying Yahweh walked with Enoch. They were together in that. And that's important because it's fellowship that God wants. When someone says, I want you, Lord, more than anything, as Enoch did, as Elijah did, then there is this incredible power to cultivate an even deeper relationship. And my guess is that Enoch, the relationship that he was cultivating with his God reached a point where there was no further for it to go, I guess. And God took him. I don't know what else to make of it. I'm not saying there's not more to it. I'm sure there is. But the fact that the next step of fellowship for Enoch seems to be directly in God's presence. That's what it seems to me to be kind of implying. Randy?
Good point. I wanted to focus just a little bit on these long ages. That's what jumps out as here. They lived so long, so long that we see that. But really the thing that I think is supposed to jump out at us is, and he died. All the other ones, other than Enoch, and he died,
right.
and he died, and he died.
That's, yeah.
And there's no other that I think of the genealogy quite like this one. That's 8 times it's trying to make the point.
Yeah.
They didn't live forever. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And I think they lived longer because they were closer, perhaps, to that original created pure genetics, less diseases that were in the world. God made that happen for a reason. It's providence, so that the world could be propagated faster.
Yeah.
They lived longer so that they could have more children, so that they could fulfill God's command.
His mandate,
And so God made that happen for them. So I think it's all part of God's plan.
Yeah, exactly. And recognizing that with Enoch, that's why I kind of made the point about, so-and-so, sons and daughters, and he died. Enoch jumps out. It's the one that doesn't have that he died. And why didn't he die? Because he had such a tight fellowship with Yahweh. And that's hinting at something coming down the road, which is going to tell us all the more why the suffering servant who perfectly walks with Yahweh, what would you expect for him? That he walked with Yahweh and he was not. But that's not what happened to him. What happens to the perfect imager of Yahweh is the ultimate tragedy. He died. That's not supposed to happen. That's not how it's supposed to work. But there was reason for that. So we get that too as that progresses. Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's comments tonight.
Anyone else?
Hello, everyone. As the song dictates, let's all stand so that we can sing "I Stand in Awe." You are beautiful beyond description, too marvelous for words, too wonderful for comprehension, like nothing ever seen or heard. Who can grasp your infinite wisdom? Who can fathom the depth of your love? You are beautiful beyond description, majesty enthroned above. And I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Holy God, to whom all praise is due, I stand in awe of you.
In Proverbs chapter 2, Proverbs chapter 2, the beginning of that section is something that really resonates with me as a parent, but I think resonates more and more as I get older and moldier, with just kind of the general plea that God has for all of mankind. If you read that with me or listen, my son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver and you search for her as for a hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of Yahweh and find the knowledge of God. How would you characterize this sort of pursuit as it's described here? Would you characterize it as one that is kind of a ho-hum sort of search, one that is mildly interested, maybe even, relatively interested? I don't think any of those are an apt description. I think that this is something that is being described as desperately seeking with great strength, seeking much like Paul describes in Acts 17, that groping after, seeking after finding God, who is not far from each one of us. What jumps out at me about this particular text is the fact that there are times in my life where this does not describe my pursuit of God. There have been. I'm trying, and hopefully I am much more like this at this stage of my life. But there have been times where that has not been the descriptive element of my pursuit. It's been kind of casual pursuit, mildly interested pursuit. Maybe there's somebody in here who can sympathize with that and recognize that that's described you before as well. What really gets me, though, is how he says that if you come after these words, these commandments that I've given you, you incline your ear, you cry out, you lift up your voice, you seek her as though she's silver, wisdom. You seek after wisdom, these commandments like you would knowing that there's gold. What would you do if someone told you that there was a bunch of buried gold in your backyard? What would you do tonight? Would you not either go out there, find a bunch of flashlights, maybe hire somebody with one of those big street things they stick in Walmart so people feel comfortable, and illuminate that whole thing and find everybody and come digging? I don't know, maybe you just do it yourself because you don't want anybody else to know. But you would dig and you would keep going if you believed that. If you believed that there is, 6 feet down, there is a giant chest full of gold and silver. What would we do? We would pursue it. What if someone told you that the key to fixing your health crisis is in a vial in Tibet? Would you not get on that plane? Would you not do everything you can, do some Indiana Jonesing if you needed to go find that thing for either yourself or for the person that you love, to drink that vial, to get rid of the horrible disease or whatever? We would pursue it. And it would not be a pursuit that would be characterized as casual, would it? I mean, it's just not how we are. When we value stuff, we go. You know what the problem with the world is, and sometimes even with God's people, is that we don't pursue God's wisdom like that. I know I haven't at times. And then sometimes we wonder, well, why am I not growing? Why am I not getting better? I've had those things, Lord. I'm faithful. I just don't feel like I don't seem to be making the improvements. And then I read a passage like this and it hits me right between the eyes. That's because I'm not searching for it like this. Now, sometimes the devil tries to tell us that, well, you're just worthless and you're not doing anything right and you're a failure. And that's not true. When we are making progress, we could do better. I'm not talking about the lies the devil tells us to get us to believe that God just can't be pleased. And that's garbage. God can be pleased. But I know in my life, and I suspect I'm not the only one, where there are times when my relationship with him is not as good, when I feel like my prayers aren't being answered, or, there are times when I feel disconnected, and I can read a passage like this and I can see the first thing I need to start with is, what does my commitment look like to finding him? Can I characterize my pursuit of Yahweh, of his wisdom, like the proverb writer does here? Like the parent begging the child, my son, listen. This is how you do it. I know I've fallen short that way. Are you falling short that way tonight? Is your pursuit of God's wisdom, is it one that would be characterized by an Indiana Jones kind of search, where you will not be denied, where you will not be stopped because you know that it's there and you're going to keep pursuing? You're going to cry out, where are you? I would find you. I would have you. Where there's nothing that you're going to let stop you. Is that how your pursuit of God and his wisdom is tonight? Or is it something other than that? If it's something other than that, let me suggest to you that's why you're not having the success that you should be. I just think that that's a fact we got to wrap our minds around. Our pursuit of God can waver. There's sometimes an ebb and flow to it, and we're always trying to draw closer to him, but sometimes heartache and sorrow and the burdens of the world, they just beat on us, and they, before we know it, we're not as diligent in our pursuit. But as soon as we realize it, fix it. Don't hang your head and say, oh, woe is me. Don't say, oh, God must have given up on me. Get right back to it. I know that treasure's there. I know He's there. I know His wisdom is there. And I'm going to dig and dig and dig until I get there, and I'm never going to let it go. Buy the truth and do not sell it, the Bible tells us. Have that sort of pursuit. For anybody here tonight who has not yet obeyed the gospel, you may be in a pursuit of God in your mind, but until you seek after Him the way this text tells you, that you make it your all, you're not going to get to where you want to be. But if you will commit to, Lord, I'm going to spend my life pursuing You because I know You are the infinite treasure at the end of this journey. If you pursue it with that sort of commitment, you will find Him. I promise, because He promised. And for those of us who have started on that journey, maybe we're at a spot right now where we recognize that there's more of a fair to middling sort of commitment than that full-fledged commitment. You can fix that right now. You can resolve right now to say, I'm going to do differently. Because no matter what we do tonight, no matter where we go, what plans we still have, whether it's to go to bed or to go eat dinner and go play video games for a couple hours, whatever, we all still have to resolve tonight that we're going to pursue things with a certain level of commitment. I hope you understand what kind of commitment is needed to be successful in getting the wisdom of God and obtaining Him. My friend, can we help you tonight somehow? You're not alone in your struggles. I promise you, you're not. You're not the first or the last person to waver somewhat in your commitment. But we can't help you if we don't know. And you won't get better until you lay it at the feet of your God, whether privately or here with us. Whatever it takes, resolve that you will seek Him with everything you got. Come forward if there's something you have need of while we stand and sing.
I am resolved no longer to linger, charmed by the world's delight. Things that are higher, things that are nobler, these have allured my sight. I will hasten to Him, hasten so glad and free. Jesus, greatest, highest, I will come to Thee. I am resolved to follow the Savior, faithful and true each day. Heed what He saith, do what He willeth, He is the living way. Hasten to Him, hasten so glad and free. Jesus, greatest, highest, I will come to Thee. I am resolved to enter the kingdom, leaving the past of sin. Friends may oppose me, foes may beset me, still will I enter in. I will hasten to Him, hasten so glad and free.